So is there something we can learn from these ancient cultures? As the explorers poured over the Appalachian Mountains into the river valleys of the Ohio and Mississippi, they were amazed what they were finding, these giant earthworks, mounds, and fortifications. One question raised in the early 1800s was what to call these ancient mound-building cultures. The name given was Adena and Hopewell cultures, as they were named after the owners on whose farm was the earliest mound explorations had taken place, with the Hopewell culture being named after Captain Mordecai C. Hopewell. The Hopewell is really viewed as the largest of these mound-building cultures. This is a map showing the Hopewell culture that extends from Canada down to the Gulf of Mexico, along the major rivers and waterways. So this was kind of their interaction sphere. Found in different areas of America's heartland are these giant earthworks in which the mound builders constructed these huge circles and giant squares. This reoccurring design gives evidence of a more centralized government as they were engineering very similar earthworks in many different locations. But one of the most imposing structures sculptured in the landscape of this continent is the serpent effigy mound found atop a hill in Adams County, Ohio. In 1846, Squire thought that the effigy mound was a representation of a serpent and an egg in combination, a symbol that has many old world connections. Now, as we know about symbols, symbols are the language of the ancients, a timeless universal language that is rich in figurative expression. Symbols are like viewing a diamond through different vantage points. In examining a cut diamond, one finds that it reflects light differently from every angle viewed. The monuments of the ancient mound builders cultures exhibit great symbolism and are marvelously instructive as an expressed language. It has been said that symbols are the means whereby we enrich, deepen, and enhance our understanding. The Bible is replete with parables, allegories, similes, metaphors, given as a symbolic language to teach society many life lessons. If you visit this site, they will tell you that it's a serpent and an egg. But as you look at this one on the right and even the aerial, you notice arrows at what you'd say would be the egg. And then you see it also on what you'd say was the head is another arrow. But what are they really trying to tell us here? Is it a serpent eating an egg, or is it a serpent shedding its skin, being born again? And so in many ways, a lot of these can be viewed in a number of different ways, these ancient artifacts and sites, as this one can. And you can ask yourself all the deep meaning that being born again has. In studying the early histories of America's heartland, we found it interesting to see how some of the earliest settlers viewed the Indians. One group was the early Jesuits, who viewed the Indians in a different light than most, for they were seekers of the lost 10 tribes, believing that the Native American Indians might be of Jewish descent, that just needed to be familiarized with their heritage. Reverend John Eliot of Roxbury, Massachusetts, in a spirited effort to convert the Algonquin tribes of Indians, made a translation of many parts of the Bible into the Algonquin language. He and Roger Williams were of the branch of Puritans, still believing and cleaving to the idea that the Indians were people worthy of salvation. William Penn, disposed towards conversion rather than extinction of the Indians, reported that the Indians of Pennsylvania resembled the Jews of London. Joseph Smith goes on to say, I was also informed concerning the Aboriginal inhabitants of this continent, this country, he said, and shown who they were and from whence they came. A remnant are the Indians that now inhabit this country. So what was Joseph Smith telling the Indians found in America's heartland? Upon the 1830 publication of the Book of Mormon in Palmyra, New York, Joseph Smith began to reach out to the Indians in a missionary effort. He directed the missionaries to the Cataracts Indians near Buffalo, New York, to the Whatnots of Ohio, to the Delaware Indians of Missouri, along with the Fox and the Sac Indians, and many Algonquin tribes of that region of the country, stating that they were of Hebrew descent, a remnant of the house of Israel, a view of the Indians that would go totally contrary to the political doctrine of manifest destiny and to the social engineering efforts that were being advanced then in the 1800s. There was one mound construction that would lend credence to what Joseph Smith and other religious leaders were saying. While visiting Mound City National Park in Ohio, I pulled out a survey map from Squire and Davis's book, The Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, which was the very first publication of the Smithsonian. It was a survey of a giant earthwork of what looks to be a Hebrew oil lamp and a menorah. I asked the director of the park as to where this giant earthwork was located. And he says, well, it was located down the road in Milford, Ohio, but it no longer exists today. The Corps of Engineers came in and wiped it clean. With that question, we asked, well, isn't this America's Antiquities? Why would they destroy something like this? What would motivate them? I mean, yes, they ran some roads through it, but to destroy this incredible artifact and what we could learn from it. And then I says, well, who was associated with the Corps of Engineers? Well, it just so happened, I go, well, John Wesley Powell. In fact, he was a major in the Corps of Engineers and liked to be referred to as Major John Wesley Powell. And so it kind of led us on this adventure of discovery that just continued to open up to us. In studying some of these early histories of this region of the country, there is much that can be learned. As we found armament, as massive burials, bone heaps, and ancient fortifications. One site that was excavated was the Dixon Mound site, where they found hundreds of skeletons of all ages, buried together under a heaping mound, which would suggest that major battles had taken place there. Found in the history of the Holland Purchase was this quote: "The bone pits, which occur in some parts of western New York, Canada, and Michigan, etc., have unquestionably a corresponding origin. They are of various sizes, but usually contain a large number of skeletons. One of these pits, discovered some years ago in the town of Cambia, Niagara County, was estimated to contain the bones of several thousand individuals. This locality was visited and examined by Mr. O. Turner of Buffalo, New York in 1823. Now, to gain an understanding of this larger history and of the silence and science surrounding these ancient mound building cultures and how it's been rolled out to society, one must come to understand the influence of these three men. E.G. Squires was out there with Dr. Davis surveying about 800 of the mounds and published the very first publication of the Smithsonian, The Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. And then next to him you have Lewis Henry Morgan, the American father of anthropology, who has really been credited for bringing forth social Darwinism to the American culture. And then you have John Wesley Powell, the American father of conservation, that really has been credited for really advancing the science of man here in America, and has really had a huge effect in how this has been brought forward. These early men of science and government came together in the mid-1800s in Buffalo, New York, to form a subset of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, with both Morgan and Powell later becoming president of that organization. Now, Lewis Henry Morgan's founding and foundational ideas into the origin and evolution of man, and they're the ones that really brought it forward, okay, really changes a lot of things here. Let me share you this little clip.
The idea of English anthropologist of his time, which is the mid-19th century, in thinking that human societies evolved into greater and greater progress towards civilization.
Lewis Henry Morgan, along with Herbert Spencer, would be credited with developing theories of cultural evolution.
Cultural evolution is an interesting way of viewing human cultures. I think we still have some remnants of that with us today, but at the time, people strongly believed that this was how societies came to be, that there was one way to get to the kind of pinnacle of being a human, or the most evolved human. You go through different phases. You start out as a savage, you then learn and experience things through your environment, you work with your technology increases, you become somehow more advanced and move through the stage of barbarism, and then eventually you reach the pinnacle of being an evolved human, which is civilization.
Morgan's theories of cultural evolution labeled Indians as savages and some religious people as barbaric.
Was very racist, but was accepted by just about all the leading intellectuals.
If Morgan influenced the leading intellectuals of the day, what influenced Morgan? Contemporary Presbyterian preacher Charles Finney wrote this, quote, "Outcomes of enthusiastic religion in Western New York feed into the formation of ethnological conceptions for Morgan," unquote. One such outcome was the publication of the Book of Mormon, which claims Middle Eastern origins of the Native Americans. Morgan's ethnological conceptions would become the extreme opposite. Natives were not as evolved as those from the Old World. Morgan biographer Leslie A. White would sum up Morgan's views of religion, quote, "If you were for theology, you were against science, and Morgan was definitely for science," unquote. Another biographer, Thomas Troutman, would write that Morgan felt, quote, "the monolith of religion must be abandoned," unquote. Morgan's new scientific ideas were shared by fellow New Yorkers E.G. Squire and John Wesley Powell, who would both become highly influential in science and in implementing manifest destiny. Coincidentally, both Powell and Squire's fathers were Methodist ministers in 1830 in Palmyra, New York, when the Book of Mormon was published there. But rather than embracing notions of Hebraic origins of Native Americans, these men would later embrace the philosophies of nearby Rochester resident Lewis Henry Morgan. This embracing for Squire is seen in an 1849 turning